Okay, picking up where we left off, we're still on page 59 looking at this figure 2.4. So what happens is if I'm listening to a digital signal, basically I have to do is I need to know what the bit period is. That's the number of bits per second, the time for one bit to come across the screen. And one way to do this is to have synchronized clocks on the receiver and the sender. They're super precise clocks that say, I'm always going to start a signal on this millisecond, and so therefore I'm expecting to see that exact same thing. And so they absolutely positively match, okay? That is one way of doing it. That's also a very expensive way of doing it. And the idea is that if a clock was off by just a fraction, as these speeds, whenever you speed up one of these signals, this little pulse gets squashed and squashed and squashed because you're trying to send more. And so it became impossible to continue to do that. So instead, they have a bit period. I'm going to jump ahead and show a diagram, and we'll come back. So what happens is, this is called Manchester encoding. And so what happens is, during a bit period, the voltage is going to switch. It's either going to go from high to low, or it's going to go from low to high. That's all I have to listen for. I don't have to listen for, the clocks don't have to be synchronized. It's just, hey, here's a bit period. Oh, wait, the voltage went up. Oh, wait, the voltage went down. That's all I need. I don't need anything else. Okay, I'm going to turn away from that for just a minute. We'll get back to it. Okay, so when I'm flipping bits, so to speak, I'm making the voltage go up or go down during a bit period. So that's how that's almost all of the digital signals use that type of encoding, just because it's physically easier to build the things. The thing doesn't require any kind of fancy hyper performance stuff. You could build these things with stuff out of your garage, so it's cheap. Okay, analog. I'm not going to go through all the physics, but waveforms have three things. They have amplitude, which means up and down. They have frequency, which means how spread out they are, and then they have what's called phase, which means has it been shifted. So the idea here in this example, it looks like the frequency remained the same, and just the amplitude changed. So this would be just like what an AM amplitude modulation, an AM radio would be. If it had been the other way around, if the waveform had been solid, but it's like a spring, it squashed up over here and then expanded over there, that would be frequency modulation, FM radio, and therefore that's how that works. Okay. So I'm going to go back to this chapter, this thing one more time. So amplitude is the signal gets taller. In other words, here's my carrier, and then doing, and so that means a 1, and now this means a 0 again. Phase means I've got them all, and they're all the same waveform, and they're all the same height. I just physically shift them. I shift them in time so they don't line up exactly right. And so in other words, there's a break right here in the waveform. If the break is in the up direction or the break is in the down direction, the abrupt change happens when I'm going up, or does the abrupt change happen when I'm going down? That becomes a 1 or a 0. I'm going to skip this one. This one is a combination of the two. It kind of makes sense. I can send a signal this way, or I can send a signal this way, but what happens if I combine them together? If I do both, amplitude and phase simultaneously, I can actually get more data. I can actually get twice as much data as either one of these techniques. So it's a cool way of cramming more data into a separate signal. However, continuing on page 63, they talk about the impact of noise. So before we get into that, what the heck do they mean by noise? So it's basically, the proper definition is any type of disturbance that hinders you from getting your signal. It could be crosstalk. It could be in other words, I have two wires going side by side, and this one's active and this one is not. And so the electricity just kind of tend to just jump around. These guys tend like act like little antennas, and these guys act like little receivers. And so there's crosstalk that goes between the two. It could be completely outside of your cable. You could be having you have electrical transformer in the basement of your building, and you run an Ethernet cable, around it. Yeah, you're probably going to get an awful lot of electrical interference imposed on that cable. And some of it is just, the mechanics of it all. If I put a signal on a wire, even if it's a low voltage wire, some of that signal is going to be dissipated in heat. In other words, the electricity is going to be turning into heat. So electricity is going to go away. It's going to diminish. And so, for example, in this amplitude kind of thing, the waves form to get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And the wire is going to heat up. Okay, because that's where it goes. It goes into heat. So all those things create noise. Now, the way you fix that is you combat noise by doing time averaging. Instead of, this is what you're expecting, but here's what you actually receive. So what you do is you just average the signal for this period of time. So the average to me would be about right there. Then the average over here would be about right here, and the average. So by averaging, I kind of can make noise go away. That's pretty cool. We talked about the binary analog, and let's go back to this guy here where I've got multiple things going on, right? I've got amplitude modulation and phase modulation going on simultaneously. This one is probably the most susceptible to noise. Why? Because it's most complex. Here, I really can't do averaging, for some signals because I've got this phase thing and I've got, it's a heck of a lot more complex. So the more complex, the more noisy these guys can be. So they talk about binary analog signals and ternary analog signals. This is a big example of that. Anyway, the takeaway, without having to read the whole section, the takeaway is the more complex the modulation, the more likely you are going to get noise. Okay, now they talk about signal and noise one more time. There's another way you can describe signal and noise. If you have a wide bandwidth, and we haven't even really talked that term yet, but we will. If you have a bandwidth that's pretty wide, it's called dynamic range. If you have a wide dynamic range, you can also use a different term called decibels. And there's a mathematical formula where you can convert decibels to signal to noise or signal to noise to decibels. It's not that big of a deal. Okay, so now we'll actually talk about what we mean by bandwidth. Okay, first of all, bandwidth is a horribly overused term. For example, if I said, well, I have broadband Ethernet, what the heck does that mean? It's marketing. Broadband in the classical sense of the term broadband and broadband Ethernet, that's nonsensical. What they basically mean is you got fast, okay? That's what they mean. Because the real definition of broadband is the range of frequencies, so I'm going to use frequencies, the range of frequencies that I'm allowed to use. Let's talk about the telephone. Okay. The human ear can hear somewhere between 20 hertz. I guess we need to talk about that. So hertz is the number of cycles per second. So 20 to 20,000 hertz. So when Alexander Graham Bell was building the telephone, did he design the wire and the transmission system for all of that entire bandwidth from 20 to 20,000? No. But he did. He was pretty smart. He went in and found what was called the voice range, a subset of those frequencies which is good enough so that you can understand human voice. So it goes from about 300 to 3,300. Okay? That's it. 300 to 3,300. So I have about, if you subtract those two numbers, I have about 3,000 hertz is my bandwidth. That's how much that's how much room I have to transmit. If I can't transmit anything lower than that, and I can't transmit anything higher than that. So my bandwidth is that range of frequencies where I can operate. By the way, once again, the author of the book's kind of smoking dope a little bit in his description of 0 to 3400. It's like, no, trust me. The phone was never designed to operate at 0 hertz. Trust me. So 300 to 3300 is the correct answer. Ignore what the author has to say. Okay, so let's talk about the common bandwidths. So a phone line has about 3000 hertz. That's what a phone line can do. A Cat5 cable, somewhere around 100 megahertz, sorry. Single mode fiber, 20 gigahertz. Now remember we talked about the difference between fiber and these guys. So remember the two lane highway and the 10 lane highway going along, that all the cars moving at the same speed, but my bandwidth is much greater than Cat5, right? Okay, so in this case 500 times the bandwidth. A TV channel transmitted over the air is about 6 megahertz. And so this is a good example of transmission of radio over the air. Every station has a very narrow chunk they can transmit over. And then the radio station in the next town can transmit over to this frequency range. So they're not they're obligated to stay within that bandwidth. Okay, I think we beat that to death. Okay, on page 67, they talk about the transmission reception using signals. Well, okay, I thought we already did that. So there's 4 steps in this, and we've talked about it before, so this may be a little bit of deja vu. The first step is in encoding. I have to take whatever I'm transmitting, like the word hello, I have to encode it into something I can send. And then I have to put it over a carrier, a modulated carrier signal. Well, what the heck does modulated mean? Well, okay. Let's just assume we're talking about copper wire again. So my carrier wave is just the blank. This is nothing. It's just a waveform being imposed on the wire at all times. And then I throw my signal on top of that, and that becomes my modulation. It's the combination of the static signal. Shouldn't use the word static, should I? It's my constant signal that has no information. And then my signal, the data, being imposed on top of it. So this non-changing background waveform, and then I throw another waveform on top of it, that becomes my modulated. Okay, one more time. Let's get back. So phase 1 is encoding. Phase 2 is sending this modulated signal. Phase 3 is the incoming signal gets demodulated. I take the waveform, I subtract out the background, and all I'm left is the data. And then the 4th step is I decode what the data is, and now I end up with the word hello again. Okay, cool. The coding of data, page 69. That's a horrible definition. I'm not even going to repeat it. Basically, what what text encoding is, it's just a technique to be able to break it down. Remember we talked about this before. I can't send data over a wire, so I have to take the data, break it into bits, 1s and 0s. And so once I get the 1s and 0s, I can very easily take a 1 and a 0 and make, plus 5 volts and minus 5 volts. I can't take the word hello and make plus 5 and minus 5 out of that. I have to break it up into tiny pieces. So each individual bit. So that's essentially data encoding. Okay. There are different types. The ASCII, so the letter H for hello, is decimal 104. And once again, I can't send a 104 over the wire, but I can send a minus 5 volts, a plus 5 volts, a plus 5 volts, a minus 5 volts, a plus 5 volts. So I can do that. And so this encoding was designed to be sent over the wire. It breaks it down into something that I can very easily convert to voltage. I can't convert that to voltage, the letter H, and I can't convert that to voltage, but I can certainly convert these guys to voltage. And if you remember, that's what layer 1 is all about. Okay, this is a good place to stop for the 15-minute mark. We'll pick this thing up again in just a few.